She stood there, humiliated, as the businessman walked away, dismissing her with a cold glance. But then the flight attendant did something shocking, something that would turn everything around. What happened next? Even those who've seen it all wouldn't believe it. But let's start from the beginning. It was a typical bustling morning at the airport, with passengers rushing through the terminal and the hum of announcements filling the air. Melissa, a tall, confident woman in her late 30s with dark skin, navigated through the crowd, the weight of a long, exhausting week in New York still lingering on her shoulders. She was ready to finally relax on the flight back to California. No meetings, no emails, just a quiet journey home. As she reached her seat in the crowded cabin, her eyes briefly scanned the rows before landing on the man who was already sitting next to it. William, a sharply dressed businessman with an air of quiet authority, glanced up at her as she approached. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. But before she could make sense of it, he quickly looked away. A moment of awkward tension passed between them. Then, without warning, William stood up abruptly, his face red as he muttered under his breath, "I'm sorry. I don't feel comfortable sitting next to you." His words were quiet, but carried enough weight to cut through the noise of the cabin. The passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Melissa froze. She had faced prejudice before, but this was different. This wasn't the usual glance or subtle comment. This was a direct, public rejection. It stung like a slap to the face, a moment of humiliation so sharp she couldn't immediately react. Her mind raced, but her body remained still, trying to process what had just happened. A soft, polite voice cut through the tension. Sarah, the flight attendant, had been standing nearby and had overheard the exchange. Her expression remained calm, but there was a firmness in her voice as she asked, "Is there a problem, sir?" William fidgeted, his face now a shade darker as he muttered something about personal preferences, avoiding eye contact. He gathered his things and quickly walked down the aisle, leaving Melissa standing there, trying to regain her composure, feeling the eyes of the entire cabin on her. Sarah's gaze lingered for a moment on the empty seat beside Melissa, as if weighing something internally. Then, without a word, she turned to face the rest of the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to take off. Please be seated." Her voice carried through the cabin, authoritative yet calm. But Sarah wasn't finished. She moved with purpose, striding down the aisle to the front of the plane. Melissa watched as she paused at the cockpit door, speaking quietly with the captain. Her posture was rigid, her expression one of quiet intensity. Melissa couldn't hear their conversation, but the look on Sarah's face told her that something important was unfolding just beyond her reach. The seconds dragged on, each one stretching the tension in the cabin tighter. Melissa shifted in her seat, feeling the eyes of the other passengers on her, but she couldn't shake the unease settling in her stomach. Was this something she should be concerned about? What were they saying up there? After a few moments, Sarah reappeared. Her face was calm, but there was an undeniable determination in her stride. She walked back down the aisle with purpose, her eyes meeting Melissa's briefly before she stopped in front of her row. "Ma'am, I'm terribly sorry for what just happened," Sarah said, her voice soft, but filled with a quiet resolve. The sincerity in her tone was undeniable. "Please, if you'd like, I'd be happy to upgrade you to a seat in first class. I'll make sure you're as comfortable as possible." Melissa blinked, still processing everything that had just transpired. She wasn't sure what to say, confused, yet somehow relieved by the unexpected offer. She glanced around the cabin, her eyes meeting the curious stares of the passengers. But there was something in Sarah's demeanor that made her feel like this wasn't just a polite gesture. It felt like something more, something resolute, something that made Melissa trust her without question. After a brief pause, she nodded, her discomfort ebbing away as she rose from her seat, feeling a shift in the atmosphere. As Sarah led Melissa down the aisle toward the front of the plane, the atmosphere in the cabin seemed to shift. Whispers rippled through the rows, some passengers muttering among themselves, others staring openly, and a few even smirking. But Melissa didn't flinch. She'd heard the whispers before, the sideways glances, the quiet judgments. But today, it didn't matter. Today, she wasn't the one shrinking. Today, she was being seen. The front of the plane was a stark contrast to the rest of the cabin. Quiet, spacious, and welcoming. Sarah guided her to a window seat, the kind with extra legroom that immediately made Melissa feel like she had entered a different world. The soft click of the seatbelt as she fastened it was almost symbolic. She was settled now, safe. And for the first time in the entire flight, the tension that had gripped her chest seemed to loosen. Sarah's voice broke the silence as she returned with a small glass of wine, her expression gentle but firm. "Here you go, ma'am," she said, offering the glass with a respectful nod. Melissa took the glass, her fingers grazing the cool rim, and for a moment, she let the warmth of the wine settle in her hands, savoring the simple act of being treated with dignity. She lifted the glass to her lips, the smooth liquid sliding down her throat as she felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. It wasn't just the wine. It was the gesture, the acknowledgement. For a moment, Melissa felt like she wasn't just an object to be tolerated, but a person whose presence was valued. "I'm just doing my job," Sarah said, her tone soft but resolute, a quiet smile playing on her lips. "We won't stand for discrimination here." The words hit deeper than expected. Sarah wasn't just following protocol. She wasn't just trying to appease a passenger. She was standing up, taking a quiet but powerful stance against something that needed to be addressed. Melissa let out a slow breath, her body finally relaxing into the plush seat as a sense of calm filled her chest. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like just another face in the crowd. She felt like someone who deserved respect, someone who mattered. And in that moment, that small act of kindness meant everything. When the flight landed in California, Melissa had a choice to make. The terminal was crowded with people disembarking, but she paused before leaving the plane. She approached Sarah once more, who was standing near the door, helping passengers. "Thank you," Melissa said, her voice steady with emotion. "I don't think you realize how much this means to me." Sarah simply nodded, her eyes shining with quiet pride. "As I said, I just did my job. Everyone deserves respect." But for Melissa, it was more than that. Sarah's bravery in standing up against the injustice had not only uplifted her, but it also made her realize something more profound. Despite the prejudices that existed in the world, there were still people like Sarah who would fight for fairness, no matter the cost. And as Melissa stepped into the busy terminal, her head held a little higher, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Hope that the world was changing, even if only one act of kindness at a time.